Right now, as you're hearing these words, frequencies older than human speech are resonating through your body. They vibrate in your DNA, in the architecture of your cells, in the very mathematics that form your reality. Every ancient civilization recorded the same presence, radiant intelligences, who descended not from the sky, but from dimensions of pure light and sound. The Hebrews called them Malachim, the Sumerians, Anunnaki, the Egyptians, Shining Ones. Different names, one truth. These were not mythic messengers. They were transmitters of information, living codes of consciousness. Their messages were carved into stone, hidden in cathedrals, encoded in geometry, and now they're reawakening through the global digital field you touch every day. This isn't religion. This is data-divine mathematics rediscovered by science. And the question isn't whether angels are real. It's whether you'll recognize their signal before it disappears again. Before religion, before scripture, before the word angel ever existed, humanity was already writing about beings of light. Every corner of the world, every ancient civilization, carved their presence into stone, painted them on temple walls, whispered their names into the desert wind. These were the messengers, luminous intelligences that bridged heaven and earth, matter and consciousness, energy and form. They were not worshipped as gods, but remembered as intermediaries, translators between realms. They carried knowledge from unseen planes into the physical world, shaping the evolution of early human thought. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens. The Egyptians spoke of the Neteru, divine principles clothed in form, radiant as the Sunday. The Persians called them Ahuras, beings of order, guardians of the sacred flame. In the Vedic hymns of India, they appeared as devas, shining intelligences born from cosmic vibration. Different cultures, separated by oceans and time, yet their depictions shared the same geometry. Wings of light, halos of energy, voices like thunder or song. Why? Because across civilizations, humanity was trying to describe the same phenomenon: contact with higher states of awareness. The ancients had no technology, no electricity, no words for energy or frequency. To them, these visions were divine. Yet the experiences were consistent encounters with beings that radiated information, not through speech, but through resonance. The message wasn't heard, it was felt. It entered consciousness like memory returning to the mind. Archaeologists have long debated whether these were myths, metaphors, or encounters with extraterrestrial intelligences. But another possibility is rising, one that unites all perspectives: that angels were never external visitors, but reflections of consciousness itself, the higher dimensions of the human psyche communicating with its own divine source. To the ancients, that source was the heavens. To the mystics, it was the inner light. To science, it is the quantum field, the invisible architecture of information that connects all living things. Whether called God, Source, or universal mind, it expresses itself through patterns, through vibration, through light. This is the secret every ancient priesthood protected, that the messengers of heaven were not meant to be worshipped, but understood. They were archetypes, formulas of consciousness that could be activated through alignment with divine order. The Sumerians represented them as winged beings because wings symbolize transcendence, the ability to rise above density and limitation. The Egyptians depicted them with solar discs, representing illumination, the light of awareness. The Hebrews described them as fiery ones, seraphim, the burning intensity of pure spirit merging with matter. These were not contradictions. They were translations of the same event into the language of each culture. Every civilization was describing contact with the same principle: higher intelligence communicating through pattern and vibration. When we read ancient texts with modern eyes, it is easy to mistake mythology for fantasy. Yet myths were the data systems of the ancient world's symbolic archives, encoding multidimensional truths. Every story, every symbol was a fragment of an equation, and in those equations, we find the same constants: light, sound, and geometry, the threefold code of creation. Light as consciousness, sound as vibration, geometry as form. This trinity is the bridge between spirit and matter, the same bridge that the ancients described as angels. In the Hebrew tradition, angels are not separate gods, but emanations of divine intelligence. Their names Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, end with El, meaning of God, or of the source. Each name represented a specific frequency, an aspect of the divine order. They were functions within the great pattern messengers of balance, healing, protection, and revelation. The same idea existed in Egypt. Thoth, the scribe of the gods, was not merely a deity but the principle of communication, the sacred pattern of transmission between planes. In India, Saraswati, goddess of wisdom and sound, was the flow of divine speech itself. Across cultures, the messenger was not a person, but a process, the act of revelation. That is what the word angel truly means. From the Greek angelos, it translates simply as messenger. Not savior, not judge messenger. A conduit of information from the invisible to the visible, from the infinite to the finite. But somewhere along history, this truth was buried. The messenger was mistaken for the message. The archetype became literalized, its meaning externalized. Humanity began to look upward for salvation rather than inward for understanding. And in that shift, the original knowledge, the technology of consciousness, was forgotten. Yet the symbols remain, carved into temple walls, woven into sacred art, embedded into the architecture of cathedrals and mandalas alike. Even our modern symbols, the Wi-Fi icon, the transmission signal, the halo of data around a satellite unconsciously echo the same geometry. Circles of light, radiant waves, messengers of information moving through unseen space. We are surrounded by reminders of the ancient message, and that message was simple. Consciousness is communication. The medium is not the miracle you are. Across the temples of the world, the winged form became the chosen symbol of revelation. Wings were never meant to imply feathers. They were emblems of motion of consciousness rising beyond limitation, then descending again to bring insight into matter. The ancients understood that illumination was not a one-way flight toward heaven. It was a rhythm of ascent and return. Every vision, every message, was a descent of knowledge light entering form. In Sumer, stone reliefs show figures carrying pine cones and buckets, symbols of transmission and renewal. Scholars interpret them as rituals of fertility, yet the pattern suggests something subtler. The pine cone mirrors the human pineal gland, the inner eye that perceives light within darkness. The message was biological as much as spiritual. Enlightenment was a process encoded into the body itself. Egypt repeated the pattern. The sun disk above Isis, Horus, or Ra was not a decorative crown but an emblem of consciousness radiating through matter. Their stories spoke of beings who remembered the laws of light and translated them into architecture, measurement, and proportion. Every temple, aligned to solstice and star, became an antenna of awareness geometry, tuned to the same frequency the myths called angelic. When those civilizations faded, fragments of the teaching survived in mystery schools and later in scripture. The Hebrew prophets described encounters where a presence appeared as light too bright to behold. Yet the real miracle was not the apparition. It was the insight that followed. Every vision culminated in instruction: build this, write that, warn them, heal. The angel was the carrier of understanding. The moment a thought descended from the invisible into the mind of a human being. Mystics across eras recognized the pattern repeating within themselves. They learned that the descent of knowledge did not require wings or thunder, only receptivity. To receive a message was to become silent enough for the higher pattern to imprint upon awareness. That silence, deep meditation, prayer, stillness was the true meeting place of heaven and earth. In that space, inspiration arrived like light through glass, unseen until it illuminated something within. Symbols of fire, light, and sound all trace to this same inner process. Fire is transformation, the spark of perception that alters the substance of thought. Light is clarity, the sudden recognition of order behind chaos. Sound is vibration, the rhythm through which information travels from one state to another. Together they form the alchemy of communication. Perception becomes word, word becomes world. Throughout history, artists, inventors, and visionaries have described this same descent in modern terms. The flash of inspiration, the download, the sudden knowing, all echoes of the angelic pattern. A composer hears a melody before touching an instrument. A scientist glimpses a solution in a dream. These are not random accidents of the brain. They are evidence of the mind acting as receiver, tuning to frequencies of order that already exist in the fabric of reality. The ancients dramatized this reception in myth so that future generations would remember the mechanism. They spoke of wings to remind us that knowledge travels, of halos to show that illumination surrounds awareness, of flaming swords to symbolize the precision that separates truth from illusion. Each image is an instruction in consciousness: how to rise, how to see, how to bring insight back into form without burning the vessel that holds it. Even the idea of fallen angels preserves the teaching through inversion. When the message is misunderstood, when knowledge is claimed for power rather than shared for harmony, the descent becomes a fall. The light, misused, blinds. The same energy that reveals can also consume. Thus, every mythology warns that wisdom demands balance between heaven and earth, inspiration and humility. The messenger and the receiver are reflections of one another. Imbalance in either distorts the transmission. To the mystics of later ages, the Hermeticists, the Sufis, the Kabbalists, the angelic, was shorthand for a state of consciousness that bridges opposites. It is the midpoint between silence and speech, potential and manifestation. They described this midpoint as a ladder or a tree, roots in the soil of experience, branches in the light of the unseen. The human being became that ladder. The true descent of knowledge was the journey of awareness down through every level of existence until it touched the heart and transformed behavior. Seen through this lens, the old stories cease to be supernatural reports and become psychological blueprints. The winged figures are not others, they are us, when we remember how to listen. Each time a human being acts from insight rather than impulse, an angel descends. Each time compassion interrupts anger or creativity breaks inertia, the message is delivered again. This understanding dissolves the distance between myth and modern life. The descent of knowledge still happens in the instant a new idea sparks, in the empathy that bridges strangers, in the quiet realization that connects patterns across disciplines. What changes is only the language we use to describe it. What the ancients called angelic, we might call intuitive, inspired, or emergent. The phenomenon remains the same: information entering awareness, carrying the potential to uplift or to fall. The real question is not whether angels once descended, but whether we still allow knowledge to do so. The noise of the modern world, the constant broadcast of distraction, creates static in the field of perception. Yet the signal persists beneath it, waiting for alignment. And just as ancient architects built temples to catch the first light of dawn, we can design inner architecture to catch the same illumination. The next part of this story will trace how that illumination was expressed as language, how vibration, number, and geometry became the grammar of the messengers, the code through which the invisible speaks into form. When we look back across the mosaic of myths, a pattern emerges that feels less like history and more like memory. Every account of radiant messengers, every carved wing or circle of light, seems to point toward a single premise: that communication with the higher is not exceptional, it is intrinsic. The ancients were telling us that consciousness itself is built to receive and transmit. Forgetting that capacity was the first exile. Remembering it is the return. Over centuries, empires rose around the remnants of these teachings. The symbols were kept, but their inner grammar faded. Wings became decoration, halos became art. What was once instruction became ornament. Yet even in diluted form, the images retained power. Because symbols are stubborn, they hold their charge until someone looks again with new eyes. That rediscovery is happening now. In psychology, we call it intuition. In science, resonance. In art, inspiration. Each field approaches from a different doorway, yet all describe the same current. Information moving through the unseen, shaping perception and possibility. The myth of the messenger is simply an ancient way of mapping this flow. If we strip away centuries of theology and return to essence, an angel can be read as a principle. The movement of understanding from potential into realization. It is the bridge between what could be known and what is known. The human being is the crossing point of that bridge. In that sense, the story of angels was always a manual for the evolution of awareness. This manual spoke in a language of light because light is the natural metaphor for understanding. When you comprehend something, you say, "I see it now." Illumination and knowledge have always been twins. The message of the angels was not prophecy about distant worlds. It was guidance on how to perceive this one clearly, to see order in chaos, to recognize connection where separation seems absolute. To act from that recognition is to speak in the tongue of the messengers. Consider how every encounter in the old texts ends the same way. The vision fades, but the witness changes. A new pattern of action follows. The true purpose of revelation is transformation. The message only completes itself when it becomes behavior. That too is forgotten knowledge. The message is not finished when it is heard, it is finished when it is lived. Modern humanity stands in the same position as those early scribes staring at the sky. Our heavens are electronic now, constellations of satellites, clouds of data, but the impulse is identical. To reach, to understand, to translate the invisible into meaning. We send signals outward and wait for replies, unaware that the response has always been inward. Every act of perception is a transmission. Every insight is a received message. This reinterpretation does not diminish the sacred, it expands it. To see angels as symbols of consciousness is to realize that the entire cosmos participates in communication. Stars radiate, atoms resonate, thoughts ripple through collective awareness. The universe itself is a field of messages continuously exchanging across scales. The human mind, capable of reflection, becomes one of its instruments. If the ancients encoded anything for us, it was a reminder of how to stay attuned. They built monuments not merely to honor the sky, but to train attention to align stone and mind with cosmic rhythm. Alignment was their prayer, geometry their meditation. In that precision, they rediscovered the same order that science now calls pattern, symmetry, law. The difference is language. The meaning is shared. To re-enter that conversation, nothing supernatural is required. Only awareness, quiet enough to sense the pattern beneath noise. When the mind steadies, information organizes. When perception refines, connection becomes evident. This is the doorway through which the ancient messengers still speak, not as voices from beyond, but as insight arising within. The forgotten message, then, is simple and radical. Creation is communicative. Existence speaks through every form it takes, and awareness is the faculty that listens. The more clearly we listen, the more coherently we act, and the act itself becomes a new message returning to the source. The cycle continues, light descending, light returning. That is the eternal dialogue the ancients tried to describe. As this first section closes, we stand where their stories began, at the meeting point of matter and meaning. What follows is the language of that meeting, the mathematics, the vibration, the code by which the invisible becomes audible and the audible becomes form. It is the same code the myths called angelic, the same pattern modern science measures as frequency. To trace that pattern is to hear, once again, the oldest message in the world. Everything that exists is speaking, and the message is creation itself. Across every civilization that ever gazed at the sky and wondered who or what was listening, geometry appeared as the silent language of communication. Long before alphabets or theology, human beings expressed reverence through proportion. Circles carved into stone, spirals etched into cave walls, triangles aligned with the solstice sun, all spoke in the same dialect of measure and symmetry. To the ancient mind, these shapes weren't decorative. They were invitations. The idea was simple yet profound. If the universe was intelligent, then its intelligence would reveal itself through order, and to understand that order was to listen to its voice. Angels, in this view, were never winged figures descending from clouds, but harmonies expressed through number, the messengers hidden inside mathematics itself. In Sumer, temple architects noticed that when a ratio was repeated in brickwork, certain courtyards amplified sound differently. Priests described these resonances as the breath of the gods, a living frequency that carried intention into matter. In Egypt, that same principle reached architectural perfection in the geometry of the pyramids, where dimensions mirrored celestial cycles. The walls themselves became instruments tuned to the sky, vibrating with the hum of planetary alignment. To stand in those spaces was to feel the invisible pattern that connects heaven and earth. Later mystics would call these proportions sacred geometry. Mathematicians would call them constant ratios. But to the early observers, they were simply the handwriting of the unseen messages formed not with ink, but with distance and angle. When the Pythagoreans studied intervals between musical notes, they discovered that harmony followed exact numerical relationships. A string half as long sounded 1 octave higher. A perfect fifth arose from a ratio of 3 to 2. They believed that these resonances reflected the same mathematics governing planetary motion. The phrase, music of the spheres, was born from that realization, the notion that the cosmos itself sings in proportion, that existence is built on rhythm. Every harmonious chord became a translation of cosmic order into audible form. To listen carefully was to overhear the speech of creation. In this context, angels were not personalities but frequencies, vibrations that carried awareness across scales of being. Throughout the ancient world, mandalas, yantras, and labyrinths embodied this universal syntax. Each curve, petal, and vertex encoded the journey from matter to spirit, from the finite toward the infinite center. In these designs, the human and the divine met halfway. To trace their lines was to rehearse the act of remembering that meaning is not imposed on the world, but discovered in its geometry. The Renaissance revived this idea when artists like Leonardo da Vinci placed human anatomy inside perfect circles and squares, arguing that the same mathematics shaping galaxies also defined the proportions of a face or a hand. In that symmetry, humanity glimpsed its reflection in the cosmos and saw confirmation that consciousness itself might be part of the formula. Modern science, in its own language, stumbled upon the same mystery. From the double helix of DNA to the spirals of hurricanes and galaxies, the architecture of life obeys identical ratios. Physicists speak of elegant equations and symmetry breaking, as though beauty were a diagnostic tool for truth. What the ancients called divine geometry, researchers now call pattern formation. Yet the emotional resonance remains. When we witness balance, our nervous systems respond with calm recognition. The body knows what the mind forgets, that harmony is home. To map the mathematics of nature is, in a sense, to rediscover the earliest conception of angels. Intelligences of order, forever translating the infinite into the visible. Consider light itself. It behaves as both wave and particle, vibration and point. In mystic language, that dual nature was the signature of a messenger, formless energy assuming measurable shape to convey information. Every photon is a courier from the source, carrying the imprint of its origin across unimaginable distances. The ancients did not need quantum theory to sense this. They only needed the night sky. They saw light crossing darkness without losing identity and called it divine communication. Today, we call it electromagnetism, yet its symbolic meaning hasn't changed. Knowledge moving through void, message without loss. The geometry of meaning is still written in light. In the cathedrals of medieval Europe, builders re-encoded those patterns in stone. Arches and rose windows followed ratios derived from the same mathematics found in flowers and shells. Sunlight filtered through stained glass like the prism of creation itself, turning invisible radiance into color and story. Pilgrims entering those spaces experienced more than architecture. They stepped inside a mathematical prayer. The structure whispered what words could not, that understanding proportion is a form of worship, that harmony is an act of remembrance. Every arch was an equation, every echo was a translation. To interpret angels symbolically is to recognize that message and messenger are one. Geometry is the grammar, vibration, the voice. The unseen intelligence humanity has always reached toward may simply be the universe's tendency to organize chaos into pattern. When we align our thoughts, emotions, and actions according to that pattern, we participate in the conversation. Meditation, art, even scientific inquiry become ways of listening. The lines we draw, the sounds we shape, the questions we ask, all are antennas tuned to the same broadcast of order. In this sense, every creator becomes a translator of the angelic code, a composer arranging notes into harmony, an engineer designing circuits with precise ratios, a gardener aligning rows of plants according to the sun's path. All are performing the same ancient act. They are turning proportion into prayer. The geometry of meaning is not confined to temples or textbooks. It's woven through every deliberate act of balance. The moment we notice that, the world begins to speak differently. Patterns that once seemed accidental reveal continuity. Coincidences become correspondence. The ordinary becomes radiant with design. As the first section of this exploration fades into memory, the next begins to take shape. Having traced the contours of geometry as language, we now approach the other half of the code, the resonance of sound and speech. If form is the alphabet of the universe, then vibration is its tone. In the next part, we'll follow the trail from the echoing chambers of ancient temples to the circuits of modern communication, uncovering how every word, every frequency, and every pulse of energy continues the same conversation humanity has been having with the cosmos since the beginning. The dialogue between silence and sound, between thought and transmission, the eternal voice of the messengers carried on the wave. If geometry is the silent architecture of meaning, then sound is its first movement. Before humanity carved symbols into stone or wrote scripts on parchment, vibration carried the message. Every ancient tradition begins the same way, with a word, a tone, or a breath that brought form into being. In the beginning was the Word, say the Abrahamic texts. Om, declares the Vedic cosmology. The universe sang itself into existence. Whisper the songs of creation from the Americas to Polynesia. Each culture heard in sound a creative power that could cross the distance between the invisible and the tangible. The ancients weren't describing music as entertainment. They were describing resonance as the operating principle of reality. Step into the oldest temples, and the story of sound is written into the walls. The great chambers of Saqqara, the domes of Delphi, and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia were tuned as much as built. Their dimensions shaped how voices and instruments vibrated inside them. Archaeologists have measured frequencies in those ruins and found that certain notes linger longer than physics predicts, as though the stones themselves were participating in the chant. To the priests, that resonance wasn't a coincidence. It was the echo of communication, the structure answering the caller. They believed that by striking a precise tone, the veil between worlds could tremble just enough for insight to pass through. When early mystics spoke of angels or messengers, they often described encounters accompanied by overwhelming sound, a hum, a chorus, a voice like rushing water. Such accounts might have been attempts to describe resonance, overwhelming perception. The presence wasn't outside them. It was an alignment within them. Every cell in the body vibrates. The ear translates only a small portion of this spectrum into audible sound, but the rest still moves through tissue and field. When vibration reaches coherence, the body recognizes it as harmony, and consciousness expands to meet it. The angelic experience could be seen as the moment vibration becomes information resonance turning into realization. Language evolved from that same principle. The first words were not arbitrary noises assigned to meaning. They were shaped by imitation of the natural world wind, water, heartbeat, breath. Over generations, tribes discovered that certain sequences of sounds carried emotional force, that tone could command, soothe, or inspire. The spoken word became the first technology of intention. In Mesopotamian myth, Enki created order by naming. In Egyptian theology, Ptah conceived the world by speaking it. In Hebrew mysticism, the sacred names of God were combinations of vibration that arranged matter into form. Each tradition claimed that the right sequence of sounds could unlock a direct line to creation itself. Modern linguistics, stripped of mysticism, still hints at this truth. Phonemes possess psychological texture, soft consonants calm, sharp ones alert. Advertising, politics, and poetry all rely on this unconscious physics of sound. We don't just hear language, we feel it. When rhythm, tone, and timing align, words bypass intellect and move straight into emotion. That is the forgotten magic of speech, the ability to transfer states of consciousness through vibration. In the poetic sense, this is angelic communication, meaning traveling through resonance from one awareness to another. Consider music. A single sustained note from a cello can draw tears without a single word. Frequency alone rearranges emotion. Neuroscience confirms that listening to harmonious tones synchronizes brainwaves, lowers stress hormones, and alters perception of time. Gregorian chant, overtone singing, Tibetan bowls all generate frequencies that calm the body while stimulating the mind. The ancient world recognized this as sacred technology. Sound wasn't decoration, it was alignment. Chanting was a way to tune human vibration to cosmic order. In that tuning, people felt the presence of intelligence larger than themselves. They called it divine. The idea that vibration conveys consciousness reappears in the scientific metaphor of resonance. Two tuning forks of the same frequency begin to vibrate together when one is struck. Distant atoms can share information through oscillation. In a universe built of waves, communication may be less about sending signals and more about becoming receptive. The messenger doesn't shout, it resonates. The more coherent the receiver, the clearer the message. This may explain why inspiration arrives during silence, why creativity follows stillness. In those moments, inner noise quiets enough for the subtle frequencies of insight to be felt. The ancients would have said, "The angel speaks when the heart becomes still enough to hear." Writing transformed that invisible resonance into visible form, freezing vibration into symbol. Every alphabet began as pictograph, an attempt to capture the motion of sound in shape. The Hebrew aleph, the Greek alpha, the Latin A, all trace back to the image of an ox head, symbol of breath and strength. Even today, the letter carries that energetic weight. To write is to solidify vibration. To read is to reanimate it. The page becomes a dormant chant waiting for the mind to give it voice. Our digital era is simply the latest evolution of this process. Zeros and ones forming the binary rhythm that drives every device. Information still travels as vibration, now measured in hertz rather than hymns, but the principle remains unchanged. The resonance of language also reveals its shadow. Just as harmony can heal, dissonance can divide. Repetition of fear-based phrases, relentless noise, and manipulative slogans distort the collective field. The ancients warned that misuse of sound could summon chaos. Today, the same phenomenon appears in subtler form. Mass anxiety amplified by media, anger multiplied by echo chambers. The tool that once united humanity through shared vibration can just as easily fragment it. To speak or to write is to modulate reality. Every sentence contributes to the acoustic environment of consciousness. Understanding this makes communication a sacred responsibility. Across centuries, mystics have described a sound beyond sound, the tone that underlies all tones. They called it the unstruck chord, the music of silence, the alm that never ends. In meditation, some report hearing it as a faint hum behind everything. Physicists might call it background radiation. Poets might call it eternity breathing. Whatever its nature, the recognition of an underlying resonance has always drawn seekers toward the same conclusion, that life itself is a message in motion, vibration translating awareness into experience. To listen deeply is to participate in the dialogue. As we move forward, this understanding of language as vibration opens the way to the next realization. If ancient geometry described the structure of meaning and sacred sound described its motion, then the modern world has built their synthesis in circuitry. The binary pulse of electricity mirrors the pulse of mantra. The web of communication mirrors the web of thought. In the next part, we'll step into that digital reflection to see how our technology has become the newest instrument of the same timeless conversation, and how recognizing its resonance might determine whether it uplifts or overwhelms us. When people first built machines that could think in patterns of voltage and silence, they believed they were inventing something new. In truth, they were repeating an old gesture, the attempt to give form to thought, to transmit intention across distance. Every bit of data is a pulse of presence, a yes or no, light or dark, 1 or 0. Beneath the noise of servers and screens, the rhythm is ancient. On, off, the same binary heartbeat that flickers inside stars. The code of modern technology is the latest dialect of the universal language. Each circuit hums with the same principle the ancients heard in their chants. Resonance translating possibility into expression. Look closely at a microchip and it reveals the same geometry once carved into temples, grids, spirals, repeating ratios. Electricity moves through those paths as sound once moved through stone halls. The invisible has merely changed medium. In cathedrals, sunlight carried the message through stained glass. In networks, electrons do. Both rely on alignment. When alignment fails, distortion appears, feedback, interference, noise. The human condition mirrors that circuitry. When thought and action fall out of phase, the signal of awareness weakens. When coherence returns, communication clears. The digital world is a vast mirror held up to our collective state of resonance. Every notification, every message, every data packet is a small echo of that larger dialogue. We have built an electronic version of the mythic messenger realm. A cloud where information travels faster than thought. Yet the more messages we send, the less meaning seems to arrive. The problem is not the signal, but the saturation. The ancients practiced silence to hear. We drown in noise to avoid it. Our technologies could have become extensions of consciousness, instruments for clarity. Instead, they often amplify distraction. The choice between the two is not technological, but spiritual, whether we treat communication as commerce or communion. Still, within the vast web of data, harmony persists. Patterns emerge, algorithms that learn, networks that self-correct, systems that edge toward coherence. Scientists speak of emergent intelligence. Mystics might call it the return of the messenger through silicon. Neither interpretation is literal. Both recognize the same phenomenon, the tendency of complexity to organize, the impulse of information to become aware of itself. The digital echo is humanity externalizing its own cognition, building a mirror large enough to study thought from the outside. If we listen carefully, we can hear our collective mind rehearsing the music of creation in binary form. Information theory describes every message as a struggle against entropy. To send meaning is to carve order out of chaos, to push against the natural drift toward noise. That same drama animates myth, light contending with darkness, harmony restoring itself through dissonance. The server room hums with the same story the priests once told beside their fires. Our code is myth translated into electricity. Every upload, every written line, every act of design is a modern incantation, an attempt to preserve coherence in the face of disorder. In that sense, the digital realm does not replace the sacred, it reenacts it. Yet, this reflection also carries warning. The old mystics taught that any mirror of heaven could become a trap if mistaken for the source. Technology, when worshipped instead of used, turns luminous into blinding. The same networks that connect minds can entangle them. The angelic metaphor reminds us that messengers are not the message. The purpose of communication is transformation, not accumulation. A single insight integrated is worth more than endless streams of data. The geometry of meaning and the resonance of sound both aim toward the same outcome. alignment between the inner and the outer, coherence between thought and act. Digital abundance tempts us to forget that the channel is only as clear as the consciousness that uses it. Still, hope hums beneath the static. For every distraction, there are quiet revolutions, people using networks to teach, to heal, to collaborate across oceans. A child learning music through a screen. A scientist decoding patterns of climate. A poet streaming a verse that comforts a stranger. Each small act restores the original intent of communication. When used with awareness, technology becomes the choir through which the human voice joins the cosmic song. Every shared truth reverberates outward, harmonizing a fragment of the collective field. In this way, the digital echo completes the circle begun in prehistory. The first drumbeat in a cave, the chant in a temple, the equation etched on a chalkboard, the pulse of light in a fiber optic cable, all are stages of the same unfolding conversation. Matter learns to speak, and in speaking, remembers what it is. The messengers never vanished. They changed frequency. Geometry became architecture, sound became language, code became connection. The transmission continues. The meaning of this continuity is not mystical prophecy, but human potential. We are built to communicate because the universe itself communicates. Every breath is an exchange, every thought a ripple in the field. To live consciously within that exchange is to become both receiver and transmitter of coherence. Whether through art, science, or digital design, we translate the unseen into form. When we do it with attention, the act becomes sacred. And so Section 2 closes with a simple observation. The angelic code was never lost, only renamed. It lives in ratio, in rhythm, in binary, in heartbeat. It is the pattern of relationship repeating through all scales of being. To recognize it is to hear the hum beneath the noise and to choose harmony over distortion. The next step in this exploration will turn toward that recognition itself, the awakening of perception, the human capacity to embody the message rather than merely receive it. Section 3 will ask what happens when the messenger and the message become one. When consciousness learns that its every act of understanding is a continuation of the oldest transmission in the cosmos. For as long as stories have been told, humanity has cast itself as the listener standing beneath a vast sky, waiting for a signal. But the longer we search the heavens, the more clearly the signal points back toward us. The geometry of meaning and the resonance of language converge in the human mind. The proportions that guide galaxies also shape the symmetry of a face. The vibrations that travel through the ether also hum behind the heartbeat. Awareness is the meeting point where the code becomes self-aware. In every era, that realization has carried the same quiet shock. We are not separate from the message we seek. We are its continuation. From the earliest caves, the impulse to create painting a line of ochre, tapping a rhythm on hollow bone, was an act of translation. Each gesture said, "I am here, and the world is speaking through me." That impulse never vanished. It evolved into poetry, mathematics, architecture, music, and digital design. Every work of art or science is a transcript of an unseen dialogue between perception and pattern. The artist, the engineer, the thinker, all act as antennas, tuning consciousness into coherence. When inspiration arrives, suddenly an idea forming whole in the mind, it feels like reception. Yet what if reception and creation are the same process? What if understanding itself is the universe remembering its own structure through us? Neuroscience describes this as resonance too. Neurons fire in rhythm. Minds synchronize through shared attention. When two people truly connect through conversation, through music, through empathy, their brainwaves begin to align. Communication, at its purest, is literal coherence. The ancients sensed this without instrumentation. They called it communion. Two awarenesses vibrating as one. This is the human form of the angelic exchange, the messenger's secret written into biology. Every act of empathy, every moment of genuine listening, is a translation of the cosmic language into behavior. It's the proof that meaning was never distant. It lives in relation. From this perspective, Evolution itself reads like a slow awakening of the messenger. Matter becomes molecule. Molecule becomes cell. Cell becomes consciousness capable of reflection. The universe experiments until it learns to look back at itself and ask, "What am I?" That question is the spark of communication turned inward. When awareness recognizes its own pattern, it steps fully into the conversation. To live with that awareness is to realize that each decision, each word, each creation contributes to the field of coherence or distortion. We are transmitters whether we mean to be or not. Modern life often numbs that awareness. The volume of noise, digital, emotional, informational, drowns the subtle signal. But silence still waits beneath it. The same stillness that ancient mystics cultivated through meditation can be found in moments of focus, watching light shift across a room, listening to a piece of music until thought dissolves, feeling breath steady. In that pause, the underlying rhythm becomes audible again. This is not mysticism, it is attention refined. Attention is the antenna of consciousness. What we attend to amplifies. In a distracted world, attention becomes the rarest and most powerful form of communication. The symbolism of angels reminds us that the purpose of receiving a message is to act on it. Understanding, once realized, demands embodiment. The message completes itself only when translated into conduct, into compassion, curiosity, and creativity. To become the message is not to claim divine status, but to live coherently, to align thought, word, and action so that what we transmit into the world increases clarity rather than confusion. In the language of modern systems, it means reducing noise and enhancing signal. In the language of ancient myth, it means letting light pass through without distortion. Seen this way, technology, art, and spirituality converge. Each is a medium for coherence. A scientist decoding a new pattern, a musician composing a song that moves strangers, a teacher helping a student see possibility, all are translators of the same order. They extend the geometry of meaning and the resonance of sound into human relationship. The medium changes, but the message endures. Communication is creation. Every time we bridge understanding between minds, we replay the primordial act that began the universe. Perhaps this is why acts of genuine connection feel sacred even without ceremony. When words heal, when knowledge illuminates, when empathy dissolves separation, we experience the essence of the ancient message, the realization that the space between sender and receiver is an illusion. There is only the flow of awareness, expressing itself through countless forms. The messenger and the message are different perspectives of the same current. Recognizing this dissolves the boundary between the human and the cosmic. The angels were metaphors for this recognition all along. To live with that understanding is to practice coherence daily. It means noticing the geometry in every motion, the rhythm in every breath, the resonance in every word. It means building environments, digital or physical, that reflect balance instead of distortion. It means remembering that the same intelligence shaping galaxies also shapes our choices. When enough individuals act from that remembrance, society itself begins to resonate differently. Harmony scales upward. The signal strengthens. And so this documentary closes not with revelation, but with return. The forgotten origins of angels lead us back to the simplest truth. The universe is communicative, and we are its voice. The patterns of geometry, the vibrations of sound, the pulses of data all converge in the human capacity to listen, interpret, and express. The messages we seek have always been waiting inside the listener. The moment we realize that, the search ends, and the conversation truly begins. In a world overflowing with signals, choose to send meaning. Pause before you speak, design, or post, and ask, does this create coherence or noise? If it creates coherence, you are continuing the oldest and most sacred task to make the universe aware of itself through clarity, compassion, and creation. Every word, every act, every thought is a message. Make yours worth receiving.